Ashes of Independence. The Northwest Indian War begins. The war did not begin with a declaration. It began with men cleaning their weapons in silence. In the autumn of 1785, Fort Harmar stood on the edge of the Ohio frontier like a splinter driven into living wood. Fresh-cut logs still smelled of sap. Iron nails rusted almost as soon as they were hammered in. Nothing here felt permanent, except the fear. Inside the fort, veterans of the Continental Army prepared for war the only way they knew how. They cleaned. Muskets were laid across knees and barrels pulled free from wooden stocks. Oiled rags moved slowly over darkened steel. Flints were checked, replaced, checked again. Powder horns were opened, sniffed, then sealed tight against the damp air. Every man knew what moisture could do to powder. One bad spark, one dead trigger, and a man died with a loaded weapon in his hands. Elias Crow sat on an upturned crate, methodical and calm. His musket, an old Charleville taken from a fallen Frenchman years earlier, had crossed more rivers and battlefields than most of the men now wearing the new blue coats of the United States Army. Crow ran a cleaning patch down the barrel, feeling for resistance, listening to the soft scrape of metal. A dirty barrel lied to you. A clean one told the truth. Crow trusted the truth. Around him, men worked quietly. No jokes. No songs. Those were for younger armies. These men had learned that silence before battle was not fear, it was respect. They had survived one war already. This one felt different. The officers spoke of treaties and boundaries, of negotiations with Indian leaders, of peace. The enlisted men checked their powder again. Crow had fought the British for 8 years. He had crossed the Delaware behind Washington, frozen and half-starved. He had seen redcoats stand there, ground in clean lines, flags flying, drums beating. This enemy did not fight like that. This enemy did not announce himself. Out there, beyond the fort, the forest swallowed sound. Trees stood close together, their roots tangled like veins beneath the soil. Rivers bent and twisted, hiding movement. Every shadow could hide a man. Every ridge could hide death. The Ohio country did not forgive mistakes. Weapons were stored carefully. Powder kegs were raised off the ground on wooden racks, protected from damp soil. Bayonets were wrapped in cloth to keep rust away. Lead shot was counted and recounted, poured into leather pouches and tied tight. Crow inspected everything. A cracked stock could break under recoil. A dull bayonet could slip on bone. A loose flint could cost a life. You treat a weapon badly, Crow said once, and it will repay you in blood. The men listened. They always did. Most of them were veterans, men too old for glory, too tired for speeches. Farmers who had traded plows for muskets again. Fathers who carried small wooden charms carved by children they might never see again. At night, they slept with weapons close. Powder horns under blankets. Muskets leaned against bedrolls, locks covered against dew. No one slept deeply. Beyond the palisade, fires sometimes flickered in the distance, too controlled to be settlers, too disciplined to be accident. Scouts reported tracks that vanished into streams, camps abandoned without ash. The enemy watched and learned. The first blood came without warning. A patrol failed to return. Then another. When bodies were found, they were left where they would be seen. Scalps taken. Weapons gone. Faces turned toward the fort as if staring back at the men inside. Crow stood over the dead, jaw tight. This was not rage. This was strategy. The tribes were testing them, measuring response times, studying formations, learning which men panicked and which held. Men like Little Turtle of the Miami people had fought Europeans all their lives. French first, then British, now Americans. He understood war better than most officers back east ever would. Inside the fort, tension thickened. Militia arrived with confidence and left with fear. Many had never fired a musket outside practice. They laughed too loudly, cleaned their weapons poorly, drank when they should have watched. Crow corrected what he could. Dry powder, he reminded them. Flints tight. Bayonets ready. Some listened. Some didn't live long enough to learn. Orders finally came. An expedition north. A show of force. A warning to the tribes. Crow read the orders and felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Too fast. Too careless. Too many men who had never bled. They marched anyway. Columns of blue coats moved into the trees, muskets on shoulders, flags wrapped to keep them dry. Scouts moved ahead, tense and alert, but the forest swallowed distance. Sightlines vanished after 50 yards. Crow smelled ambush long before it came. The air changed. Birds vanished. Wind died. Then the forest exploded. Gunfire erupted from unseen positions. Arrows fell from above. Men screamed and fired blindly. Smoke filled the trees, thick and choking. Crow dropped to one knee, fired, reloaded by instinct. Ramrod. Powder. Ball. Prime. Fire. Men broke formation. Militia ran. Veterans tried to hold. It didn't matter. The enemy chose the ground. The time. The angle. By noon, the expedition was shattered. By evening, the retreat had begun. They returned to Fort Harmar broken. Weapons fouled. Powder spent. Faces hollow. Crow cleaned his musket that night by lantern light, hands steady despite the shaking inside his chest. He scraped blood from the barrel, not all of it his own. Around him, men did the same. No one spoke. This war was not going to be won quickly. It would be won slowly, or not at all. The Ohio country had drawn its line, and every man who crossed it would pay a price. Part 2. The Country Learns to Kill. 1786 to 1789. Winter did not stop the war. It only changed how men died. Snow fell early that year, heavy and wet, bending branches low and hiding tracks by morning. The Ohio country looked peaceful from a distance. Up close, it was a trap. Rivers froze just enough to carry weight, then broke without warning. Muskets misfired. Powder spoiled. Fingers stiffened until a man could barely feel the trigger. Inside Fort Harmar, the veterans adjusted. They wrapped locks in oiled cloth. They kept powder inside coats, close to the body, warm and dry. At night, muskets were laid across chests, barrels angled away from breath to keep moisture out. A man learned quickly, or he didn't live long. Elias Crow watched the younger soldiers struggle. They cursed the cold, complained about rations, missed home. Crow said nothing. He had learned long ago that winter didn't care what a man wanted. The enemy did not disappear with the snow. They moved quieter now. Scouts reported tracks that led nowhere. Camps found cold, fires burned clean, nothing left behind. Warriors traveled light, powder, blade, food for a day. They did not carry what they could take. Little Turtle adapted the war to the season. Small groups. Short strikes. No pursuit. A single gunshot in the dark could empty a fort of sleep. Weapons became life. Muskets were stripped nightly. Ice removed from pans. Springs checked for cracks. Men sharpened bayonets until edges bit skin at the slightest slip. Knives were honed on river stones, slow and patient. Crow taught the men how to move without sound, how to keep metal from clinking, how to step where leaves would not betray them. Every noise is a message, he told them, and the forest always delivers it. The settlements paid the price first. Cabins burned, livestock slaughtered, wells poisoned. Families fled east with frostbitten feet and empty hands. The fort gates opened and closed daily. Some men arrived carrying rifles they didn't know how to clean. Others carried bodies. Crow saw children who didn't cry anymore. Fear traveled faster than any courier. Back east, the government argued. Out here, the war hardened. Militia companies were raised and broken just as quickly. Men marched north full of confidence and returned south empty-eyed. Some never returned at all. Crow rode escort for one such column in early spring. The militia laughed too loudly, fired at shadows, left food uncovered at night. The attack came before dawn. It was over in minutes. 3 dead, 5 wounded. The militia scattered. Crow regrouped who he could and withdrew. He cleaned his musket that night until his hands ached. By summer, the tribes had learned something important. The Americans would come back no matter how many died. So the war changed again. Ambushes grew bolder. Attacks came closer to forts. Scouts vanished. Messengers never arrived. The forest pressed in. Council fires burned deep in the interior. Little Turtle spoke carefully. Blue Jacket listened closely. Warriors from many nations sat together, something that had been rare before. The Americans do not learn quickly, Little Turtle said. But they do not stop. They believe numbers will save them, Blue Jacket answered. They believe land is worth any cost. A decision was made. If the Americans would not stop coming, they would be taught fear. Fort Harmar felt smaller every day. Supplies ran low. Powder was rationed. Lead was melted and recast from damaged shot. Every round counted now. Crow oversaw storage personally. Powder kegs stayed sealed. Flint reserves were guarded like gold. Broken muskets were cannibalized for parts. Nothing was wasted. Men were. In 1788, word spread of a new settlement at Marietta. A river town. A foothold. A challenge. Crow walked the perimeter at night, listening. The forest answered with silence. That silence meant movement. One night, shots rang out close to the walls. An attack repelled quickly, but it changed something. The war was no longer distant. It was at the gate. Men slept in boots. Bayonets fixed before dawn. Every sound brought hands to weapons. Crow watched faces harden. Fear turned into anger. Anger turned into resolve. Letters from home stopped coming. Men stopped writing back. The war was teaching them what it always taught. Survival came first. Everything else followed. By 1789, the frontier was fully awake. The Ohio country had become a killing ground. Crow stood on the palisade one evening, musket resting against the wood, eyes fixed on the tree line. This land was no longer testing them. It was shaping them. And soon, very soon, the nation would send another army. A larger one. One that would either learn or break completely. Part 3. Harmar's Shame. 1789. By the time General Josiah Harmar arrived on the frontier, the war had already judged him. He simply did not know it yet. Harmar rode west with confidence. He had a reputation, a uniform heavy with buttons, and orders clear enough to satisfy men far from danger. He was to march north into the Ohio country, strike the hostile tribes, and restore American authority. Authority, he believed, came from rank. The Ohio country believed otherwise. Preparations began immediately. Men were gathered, regulars and militia mixed together like oil and water. Supplies were counted, repacked, counted again. Powder was issued in tight measures. Lead shot was weighed by hand. Muskets were inspected quickly, too quickly. Elias Crow watched it all with quiet concern. Too many men. Too little discipline. Too much faith in paper orders. He checked his own weapon carefully. The lock was clean. The flint sharp. The barrel dry. He wrapped the musket in oiled cloth and set it beside his bedroll. He slept lightly, boots on. He had seen this before. Harmar addressed the men before the march. He spoke of restoring peace, of showing strength, of ending the problem before winter returned. The militia cheered. The veterans stayed silent. Crow noticed how Harmar stood, upright, exposed, comfortable in open ground. He noticed how little the general looked at the tree line. Doesn't listen to the woods, Thomas Harlan muttered beside him. No, Crow replied. And the woods always speak first. The column moved north in early October. Drums beat. Flags flew. Muskets rested on shoulders. The sound carried far through the forest, too far. Scouts were sent ahead, but not far enough. Flanks were poorly guarded. Camps were set where water was easy to reach, not where defense was strongest. Crow watched warriors watching them. Not directly. From angles. From distance. From places no map showed. Weapons suffered first. Powder spoiled in damp air. Flint chipped. Stocks cracked under careless handling. Militia leaned muskets against trees, barrels touching wet bark. Crow corrected what he could. Off the ground. Cover the pan. Dry before dark. Some listened. Some laughed. The forest remembered who laughed. The first engagement came quickly. A detachment sent forward encountered resistance near a river bend. Shots were exchanged. Warriors withdrew deliberately, leaving just enough sign to encourage pursuit. Harmar ordered the chase. Crow felt the tightening in his chest again. This was wrong ground. Wrong pace. Wrong enemy. The militia advanced eagerly. The veterans followed because someone had to. The ambush was clean. Gunfire erupted from three sides. Trees became cover. Shadows became men. Arrows fell into the ranks, silent and deadly. Militia panicked. Some fired wildly. Others froze. A few ran straight into the forest, never to return. Crow dropped, fired, reloaded. He shouted orders until his throat burned. He dragged wounded men back by their collars. He watched Harlan go down, leg torn open by shot. They held just long enough to retreat, just long enough to survive. Harmar refused to accept defeat. Another force was sent out. Another mistake. This time, the warriors waited longer. Let the column stretch. Let discipline erode. Then they struck. What followed was not a battle. It was a collapse. Men broke ranks. Officers shouted conflicting orders. Powder ran low. Muskets fouled. Crow fought until his barrel burned his hands through cloth. He fixed bayonet when shot ran out. He saw men fall screaming and men fall without a sound. By the time Harmar ordered withdrawal, the field belonged entirely to the dead. They counted losses in silence. Bodies lay scattered through the trees, stripped of weapons, stripped of dignity. Some were found days later. Some were never found at all. Harmar blamed the militia. The militia blamed the veterans. The veterans blamed no one. They already knew the truth. The retreat back to Fort Harmar was slow and bitter. Men limped. Wagons creaked under wounded weight. No songs were sung. No drums played. Crow cleaned his musket every night, even when his hands shook with exhaustion. Blood stained the patches red before they turned black. This was not maintenance. This was mourning. When they reached the fort, news spread fast. Harmar's expedition had failed. Again, the frontier listened and learned. Back east, the defeat was called unfortunate. Out here, it was called shame. Settlers fled in greater numbers. Tribes grew bolder. The war shifted decisively. Little Turtle had proven something important. The United States Army could be beaten. Badly. Crow stood on the palisade days later, watching smoke rise far in the distance where another settlement burned. This war was no longer about land alone. It was about pride, survival, memory. And now, the nation would have to answer a question it could no longer ignore. How much blood was it willing to pay? The answer was already on the march. Part 4. The Confederation Rises. 1790. The forest did not celebrate Harmar's defeat. It prepared. Across the Ohio country, messengers moved quietly along old trails. They carried no flags, no written orders. Only words remembered and repeated with care. Council fires burned deeper inland, far from rivers the Americans could reach. For the first time in generations, old enemies sat together. Miami beside Shawnee. Delaware beside Wyandotte. Ottawa, Potawatomi, Mingo. Not because they trusted one another. Because they understood the threat. Little Turtle spoke rarely. When he did, men listened. The Americans will return, he said. They always do. They believe defeat is temporary. Blue Jacket nodded. Then we make it permanent. Plans were drawn without maps. Rivers, ridges, fallen trees. Everything was remembered, not written. Every path the Americans might take was discussed. Every place they would camp was already known. This was not preparation for a raid. This was preparation for annihilation. The Confederation did not gather in one place. That would have been foolish. Instead, they trained apart, fought apart, and planned together. Small units learned to move as one. Signals were refined. Timing practiced. Ammunition conserved. They studied American habits. How they stacked arms. How they cooked. How they relaxed when they thought they were safe. Every weakness was cataloged. Meanwhile, inside American forts, confusion ruled. After Harmar, no one wanted responsibility. Officers argued over command. Militia refused long-term service. Supplies arrived late or not at all. Weapons suffered. Powder was damp from river transport. Flints cracked under poor inspection. Some muskets had barrels warped from overuse. Elias Crow corrected what he could. He taught men to strip their weapons completely, to oil metal sparingly, to keep locks covered at all times. He showed them how to test flints properly, how to strike sparks in the dark without wasting powder. This war, he told them, will be decided by small things. Most of the men believed him. Command did not. In Philadelphia, pressure mounted. Settlers demanded protection. Newspapers spoke of humiliation. Congress argued over money. President Washington listened quietly. He had seen real war. He knew the danger of sending unprepared men into hostile ground. But the frontier was bleeding, and something had to be done. General Arthur St. Clair was given command. He was experienced, loyal, brave. He was also sick, aging, and tasked with building an army from scraps. Crow read the orders when they arrived. Another march north. Another attempt to impose control. This time larger. This time decisive. Crow felt no relief. Only dread. St. Clair's army assembled slowly. Regulars arrived under strength. Militia came unwillingly. Supplies were short from the beginning. Horses were thin. Wagons broke down. Rations spoiled. Weapons were issued in haste. Crow inspected a line of muskets one evening and found 3 with faulty locks. He set them aside. An officer protested. "We need every gun." "You need guns that fire," Crow answered. The officer walked away. Training was rushed. Men drilled in open fields, flags waving, drums beating. Bayonets gleamed in the sun. The forest watched. The Confederation already knew the route. They knew the pace. They knew where the army would slow, where it would camp, where discipline would falter. Little Turtle waited. By late summer of 1790, the Ohio country was quiet. Too quiet. Settlers mistook it for peace. Crow did not. He sharpened his bayonet until the edge caught light. He dried his powder twice a day. He slept with his musket across his chest, finger resting near the trigger guard. This was the calm before something vast and terrible. Warriors gathered near the headwaters of the Wabash. Not in celebration. In focus. Weapons were checked, muskets captured from Americans, British powder carefully stored, blades sharpened to a whisper. Paint was applied not for ceremony, but for recognition in chaos. Each man knew his place. Each group knew its role. No one spoke of retreat. As St. Clair's army began its slow march north, Crow felt the land close around them. Trees thickened. Trails narrowed. The air grew heavy with damp and decay. The army moved like a wounded animal. And the Confederation followed. Silent. Patient. Unseen. This time, there would be no warning. No escape. The forest had chosen its ground. Part 5. St. Clair's Nightmare. November 1791. The army woke before dawn. Cold hung over the camp like a held breath. Frost-coated blankets, boots, gunstocks. Men moved stiffly, quietly, stamping feet to bring life back into numb flesh. Fires burned low. Powder horns were checked by touch rather than sight. Elias Crow rose without hurry. He had slept lightly, musket across his chest, flint covered. He knew this feeling. The air before disaster carried a weight a man learned to recognize if he survived long enough. This ground was wrong. The camp sat low, ringed by trees and broken terrain. No proper earthworks. No cleared fields of fire. Wagons clustered too tight. Horses restless. Crow checked his weapon. Dry pan. Sharp flint. Clean barrel. Around him, others did the same. Veterans moved with purpose. Militia fumbled, breath fogging, hands clumsy with cold. Somewhere in the dark, the forest listened. The attack came as the sky began to lighten. Not with a charge. With sound. A sudden tearing volley erupted from the trees. Muskets fired almost at once, coordinated, deadly. Bullets ripped through canvas and flesh. Screams followed immediately. Then came the war cries. They rolled through the camp like thunder. Warriors surged from every direction. Miami, Shawnee, Delaware, Wyandotte, faces painted, weapons ready, moving fast and low. They did not hesitate. They did not scatter. They closed. Crow was on his feet instantly. "Form up," he shouted, voice raw. "Hold the line." Some did. Most did not. Militia broke toward the wagons, colliding, tripping, firing blindly. Officers shouted orders that vanished into the noise. Horses screamed, rearing, tearing loose. Crow fired. Reloaded. Fired again. The barrel heated quickly. Smoke filled the air, thick and choking. Visibility dropped to yards. Bayonets met bodies. The battle collapsed into chaos. Warriors moved through gaps with precision. They targeted officers first. Drummers. Standard bearers. Men who tried to rally others. Crow saw a captain fall with a blade in his throat before he finished drawing his sword. Another volley tore into a group trying to form a line. Men fell atop one another, blood steaming in the cold. Crow fixed bayonet. Shot was running out. General St. Clair was carried through the camp, ill and bleeding, issuing orders no one could execute. His army was dissolving faster than he could understand. Crow fought near the center, back to back with men he trusted. Thomas Harlan was there, face gray, legs still stiff from Harmar's campaign. "We're surrounded," Harlan said, breathless. "I know," Crow answered. They fought anyway. The Confederation tightened the ring. Warriors fired, fell back, reloaded. Others rushed in with blade and club. Captured American muskets cracked from the tree line. This was no wild attack. This was practiced destruction. Little Turtle had chosen the moment perfectly. Crow stabbed once, twice. He felt bone, felt resistance. He pulled free and fired at point-blank range. A warrior fell. Another replaced him. Crow slipped in blood and went to one knee. A hatchet whistled past his head, burying itself in a wagon wheel. He rose and drove his bayonet forward again. No time to think, only to act. Men screamed for help that never came. Wounded crawled toward the wagons and were cut down. Surgeons were killed where they stood. Powder wagons were overrun. The American line ceased to exist. What remained was survival. St. Clair finally ordered retreat. It was already too late. The withdrawal turned into flight. Men ran through the trees, throwing away weapons to move faster. Warriors pursued briefly, then stopped. They had already won. The field belonged to them. Crow ran until his lungs burned. He stumbled over roots, through brush, over bodies. He did not look back. When he finally collapsed near a stream miles from the battlefield, he retched until nothing came up. Around him, survivors gathered slowly. Broken, bloody, silent. The numbers told the story. Over 600 American soldiers dead. Hundreds more wounded. Nearly the entire army destroyed. The worst defeat the United States Army would ever suffer. Crow sat alone that night, hands shaking as he cleaned his musket. Blood, mud, powder residue. He scrubbed until the steel shone again. Around him, men stared into fires that barely warmed them. No one spoke. What words were left? The frontier had delivered its answer. The Confederation stood victorious. The United States stood humiliated. And the war had entered a new phase, one that would demand something different, something harder, something colder. Crow stared into the dark forest. This war would not be won by numbers. It would be won by learning, or it would never be won at all. Part 6, Winter of Widows. 1791 to 1792. The war went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that meant peace. The kind that followed slaughter. News of St. Clair's defeat moved east slowly, carried by broken men and second-hand reports. By the time it reached the cities, the truth had already grown heavier. Names filled columns of newspapers. Numbers replaced faces. Out on the frontier, numbers meant nothing. Men knew exactly who was gone. Winter closed in fast. Snow buried the trails. Rivers froze solid. Forts filled with survivors who carried more than wounds. Some stared too long into fires. Others woke screaming. Many drank when they could. Elias Crow did not drink. He cleaned weapons. Every night, even when they had not been fired. The dead did not stay on the battlefield. They followed the living. Crow saw them in the way men flinched at sudden sound. In the way hands shook when loading powder. In the way silence stretched too long before anyone spoke. Veterans who had survived British volleys now broke under memories of trees screaming with gunfire. This war had no lines. No safety. The frontier paid its price next. Widows arrived at forts clutching letters they could not read. Some waited days for confirmation that never came. Others already knew. Crow watched a woman kneel in the snow when she heard her husband's name. No one helped her up. They understood. Weapons rusted faster in winter. Moisture crept into locks. Springs weakened. Powder clumped if not watched carefully. Crow taught men to dry powder by firelight without igniting it. To keep flints wrapped in cloth. To sleep with weapons inside bedrolls so breath and warmth kept death at bay. You survive winter, he told them. You earn another year. Some did. Many didn't. Back east, the defeat could not be ignored. Congress argued. Accusations flew. Newspapers called it a disgrace. Some questioned whether the nation deserved the land it claimed. Washington listened and decided. The army, as it stood, was finished. Militia had failed. Improvisation had failed. The nation needed professionals. Men trained to fight this kind of war. The answer came with a name spoken carefully. Anthony Wayne. Mad Anthony. A man with a reputation forged in the Revolution. A man who believed discipline was not cruelty, but survival. When the news reached the frontier, reactions were mixed. Some scoffed. Others hoped. Crow felt something close to relief. Winter training began even before Wayne arrived. Drills in snow. Bayonet practice until arms burned. Weapon inspections that found no excuses acceptable. Men who complained were dismissed. Men who stayed hardened. Crow oversaw storage and maintenance, turning chaos into order where he could. For the first time since the war began, something changed. The army stopped rushing. Across the Ohio country, the Confederation watched. They did not celebrate St. Clair's defeat. They prepared for what came next. Little Turtle knew the Americans would adapt. He had seen it before. He respected it. Blue Jacket believed momentum mattered more. "We broke them," Blue Jacket said. "We can break them again." Little Turtle was not convinced. Winter stretched long. Food ran low. Disease followed. Graves multiplied quietly behind forts. Crow buried Harlan in February. The leg wound had never healed. Fever took him in 3 days. Crow cleaned Harlan's musket before it was issued to another man. He did not say a word. By spring, the frontier looked different. Harder. Sharper. Men marched with purpose again. Weapons were clean. Powder dry. Lines tighter. The army had learned the cost of ignorance. Now it would learn something else. Discipline. Crow stood on the palisade one final winter night, breath fogging, musket resting against the wood. This war was no longer about reacting. It was about preparing. And somewhere east, Anthony Wayne was already moving.